I always loved that little cafe tucked between the bookstore and the flower shop. It had this soft hum of jazz music, the clinking of spoons against porcelain, and the smell of cinnamon and fresh espresso hanging in the air. It felt like a place where memories were meant to be made, where love could grow gently between shared smiles and unfinished conversations. That's why I chose it for our talk. I wanted it to be special, a place where we could talk about the next steps, maybe moving in together, maybe even planning a trip. I had hope stitched into every word I was about to say. My chest was tight with nerves, but it was the good kind, the kind that shows up when you think something beautiful is just around the corner. Leo sat across from me, looking distracted. He wasn't dressed any differently, but there was a coldness in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. He scrolled through his phone like he didn't want to be there, like this was just another errand to check off his list. I smiled at him anyway, thinking maybe he'd had a rough day. I asked about work, about his week, trying to create space for warmth to come back between us. But he kept his answers short, vague. There was a wall up. I felt it, even though I tried to ignore it. Still, I pressed on, sharing my excitement about a new design course I wanted to take, talking about how I saw our future, what we could build together. I reached for his hand halfway through my sentence. That's when he looked at me differently. Not lovingly, not even kindly, just tired. Then, without blinking, he dropped the words like a hammer on glass. "You're just not good enough. I need someone with ambition, someone who can match my lifestyle." My ears rang. My throat went dry, and for a second, I thought maybe I misheard him. Not good enough? My heart didn't break instantly, it froze. I blinked, searching his face for some kind of joke, a twitch of regret, anything. But he meant it. He said it with a kind of cruel calm, like he'd rehearsed it and finally felt free saying it out loud. The floor didn't fall out from under me, but something inside me definitely cracked. And still, all I could manage was a quiet, "What?" before everything I thought we were began to unravel right there between the coffee cups and crumbs. I don't even remember how long I sat there staring at him. It could have been seconds or an hour. Everything blurred except the sound of my own heart pounding in my chest, like it was trying to warn me, run, scream, do something. But I didn't move. I stayed frozen in that wooden chair, surrounded by strangers sipping lattes, completely unaware that my world had just shattered. My hands trembled, and I tucked them under the table, ashamed of how exposed I felt. My cheeks burned, not just from the sting of rejection, but from humiliation. Had I been fooling myself all this time? Did he ever love me the way I loved him? He stood up without ceremony, as if he hadn't just gutted me with a few words. No apology, no softness. Just a shrug, and that same cold detachment he walked in with. "I hope you find someone more your speed," he said, like he was doing me a favor. And then he left. Just like that. No backward glance, no hesitation, just the sound of the doorbell jingling behind him as he stepped into the night. I watched his back disappear through the window, and something in me finally broke loose. I pressed my lips together, holding in the sob that clawed at my throat. People say heartbreak is like drowning, but this felt more like being left behind in a burning building. I didn't cry right away. That came later. First came the silence, the heavy, hollow silence that filled the space where our future used to live. I gathered my things slowly, careful not to let anyone see the devastation etched across my face. The waitress smiled at me, asked if everything was all right, and I lied. Of course I lied. "I'm fine," I said, like I wasn't falling apart on the inside. On the way home, every streetlight, every shop window felt unfamiliar, like the world had shifted while I wasn't looking. And maybe it had. I wasn't sure who I was anymore without him, or worse, now that I knew what he really thought of me. Back at our apartment, the one we'd shared for over a year, everything felt different. His jacket still hung by the door, his cologne lingered faintly in the air, and yet the place felt emptier than I'd ever known it. I stood there in the dark for a while, keys still in hand, trying to catch my breath. The quiet was unbearable. Too sharp, too loud. I walked into the kitchen and stared at the mug he used every morning, still sitting by the sink. I hated how ordinary it looked. I hated that even the smallest things still had him in them. How was I supposed to sleep in that bed, knowing he'd walked away without even blinking? The tears finally came when I sat on the floor next to the couch, knees pulled to my chest like a child trying to disappear. They weren't loud or dramatic. They came slow and steady, like rain soaking into the earth. I wasn't just crying over him. I was crying over the version of me that had believed in us, in our future, in him. I had given so much of myself, my time, my heart, my trust. And he reduced it all to a sentence: not good enough. The words echoed over and over in my mind like a cruel mantra. I started to wonder if he was right, if I was small, if I'd always been small, and I just hadn't noticed it until now. But somewhere, beneath the pain, something small and defiant stirred. Not anger, at least not yet. Just a flicker of something else. A whisper I almost didn't hear. It said, "He didn't see you." Not really. Not the way you deserve to be seen. And that voice, that quiet little ember, it stayed with me through the night. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every word, I made a silent promise. I didn't know how or when or what it would look like, but I would become someone I could be proud of, someone who didn't need to beg for love, someone who would never again let anyone decide her worth. The morning after the breakup, I didn't rise like a phoenix. I didn't glow with resolve or whisper affirmations in the mirror. I sat on the floor in the same clothes I'd cried in, staring at a blank wall and wondering what the hell I was supposed to do now. Everything felt meaningless. I called in sick, not because I was physically unwell, but because I couldn't imagine pretending to be okay while my heart was still in shards. My phone lit up with a text from a friend, something about brunch. I didn't reply. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to be comforted. I wanted to be invisible until the ache dulled. But invisibility wasn't sustainable. Bills needed paying. The lease was still in my name, and slowly, grudgingly, I realized no one was going to save me. That hit hard. Leo had been my anchor, and now I was drifting in waters I didn't know how to navigate. So I did the only thing I could. I packed up my life, boxed away the memories, sold the couch we once cuddled on, and left. I moved to a new city with nothing but a couple of suitcases, a half-finished resume, and a fire in my gut I didn't understand yet. The apartment I found was tiny, the walls were thin, and the neighbors were loud, but it was mine. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have to shrink to fit inside someone else's idea of me. I took the first job I could find, admin assistant in a gray office that smelled like toner and stale coffee. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely didn't scream ambition, but it paid just enough to keep me going. At night, I scoured the internet for courses, side hustles, anything that could sharpen my mind and stretch my possibilities. I barely slept. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, mornings I had to talk myself out of quitting. But somewhere between the cheap instant noodles and the broken printer in that office, I started to rebuild. Slowly. Clumsily. Quietly. Like learning to walk again after forgetting what it means to stand. The turning point didn't come with fireworks. It came on a Tuesday night, in my tiny kitchen, while I was eating cereal straight from the box and watching a free webinar on building a digital brand. The woman on the screen said something like, "You don't need to be the smartest in the room, you just need to be relentless." That hit me. Not because I felt smart, but because I was tired of waiting for someone to see my potential. I wanted to see it myself. That night, I signed up for 3 online courses: marketing, personal finance, UX design. I didn't know what I was aiming for, I just knew I couldn't stay where I was. From there, things snowballed. I woke up early to study before work. I networked with strangers on LinkedIn, asked questions in forums, reached out to people I admired even when it terrified me. Some answered, most didn't, but I kept going. I failed my first 2 pitch decks, flat out embarrassed myself in front of mentors who were kind but honest. I cried in bathroom stalls and doubted everything I was doing. Still, I kept showing up. I started freelancing on weekends, small gigs, nothing glamorous, I wasn't making much, but I was learning. I was stretching. For the first time in my life, I was investing in me, and that felt like a rebellion in itself. Then came the break. A client referred me to someone bigger. That someone loved my work and introduced me to an investor. I pitched them my idea for a digital lifestyle platform, part content, part consulting, and to my shock, they said yes. Not maybe or we'll think about it. Just yes. I walked home that day shaking, barely breathing, clutching a folder of notes like it was made of gold. It wasn't just the money. It was the moment I realized I wasn't building a business out of revenge. I was building it out of possibility, my own. I was starting to see myself not as broken, but as becoming. Within a year, everything changed. My tiny apartment was replaced by a sleek high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that reminded me daily of how far I'd come. I went from hustling for side gigs to hiring a team of my own, smart, kind, creative people who believed in the vision I once doubted myself. I started getting invited to panels, podcasts, features, and online magazines. My bank account didn't just grow, it multiplied. But more than the numbers, it was the confidence. The way I held my head higher in meetings. The way I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I had become someone even I didn't recognize. And that was a good thing. People started whispering about me. In threads, in emails, in tagged posts on social media. A friend forwarded me a screenshot one day. Leo, tagged in a comment under a photo of me at a tech conference, looking sharp in a white suit, holding a mic. "Didn't you used to date her?" someone wrote. He hadn't replied, but curiosity got the best of me, and I clicked through to his profile. What I saw hit differently than I expected. His updates were vague and infrequent. Rumors floated around, lost his job, something about a failed startup, a breakup with some influencer he'd been flaunting months before. He looked tired in his photos, diminished, searching. I should have felt triumphant. Maybe a part of me did. But mostly, I felt still. Like the storm that once defined me had finally passed. I wasn't chasing revenge anymore. I was living in the space beyond it. I had built something real, something mine. And for the first time since that awful night at the cafe, I didn't feel small. I felt expansive, capable, worthy, the kind of woman who no longer needs validation from someone like Leo to believe in her own value. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. Because deep down, I knew the universe had already arranged our next meeting, and when it came, I'd be ready. The air buzzed with low conversation, clinking glasses, and the soft shimmer of live jazz weaving through it all. I stepped out of the black car slowly, heels clicking against the marble walkway, the hem of my ivory dress catching the breeze just enough to feel like a scene from a movie. The gala was being held in one of those impossibly ornate venues. Crystal chandeliers, Art Deco staircases, and too many people trying too hard to look effortlessly important. And yet, as I walked through the grand entrance, people turned. Eyes lingered. Some whispered. I was used to it now. Not because I craved attention, but because I had finally become someone who couldn't be ignored. My name was on the VIP list, of course. I was here as a guest speaker, a featured success story for one of the tech sponsors. Funny, right? A year ago, I was watching events like this from my phone, wondering how people got into those rooms. Now I was being escorted through them with a glass of champagne in hand. I moved with grace, but my thoughts were focused. Who was I here to meet? What doors could this open? How many young women could I help if I played this right? I wasn't here for romance or revenge. I was here for purpose. That's what made what happened next feel so surreal. I didn't see him right away. He wasn't in a suit, wasn't schmoozing with investors or laughing with the elite. He was off to the side of the ballroom dressed in black, holding a tray. For a second, I thought I must be wrong, that my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then he turned. Leo. His face was thinner, older somehow. He looked up, and in that instant, before either of us said a word, I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. It was like time stopped, and in that silent second, I stood taller. I didn't blink. I just smiled, calmly, as the past walked straight into the future I had built without him. He hesitated before approaching, like maybe he thought he'd imagined me, or wasn't sure if I'd acknowledge him at all. But curiosity got the better of him, as I knew it would. He put the tray down and made his way through the crowd, straight toward me. There was a tension in his steps, an awkwardness that hadn't been there before. Gone was the man who once spoke with unchecked confidence. In his place stood someone unsure, someone small. "Eva?" he said, like the name tasted unfamiliar in his mouth. "Wow, you look amazing. I've missed you." His voice cracked, just barely, and I almost pitied him for it. I smiled politely, as if I'd just been greeted by an old coworker I barely remembered. "Leo," I said simply, letting the name settle between us like a stone dropped into still water. He searched my face for something, recognition, emotion, maybe even forgiveness. But I gave him none of it. I wasn't angry, I wasn't cold, I was fine. And that, I think, was what unsettled him the most. He wasn't prepared for this version of me, the one who didn't need him, who no longer saw him as a mirror for her worth. I asked how he'd been, not out of care, but curiosity. I wanted to hear how he'd shaped the story of his own downfall. He stumbled through his words, mentioning something about a rough year, changes in the industry, people not understanding his vision. I nodded, sipping my champagne as he spoke, watching him shrink with every sentence. He tried to spin it all as temporary, as if it was just a phase before his inevitable comeback. I let him talk, let him fill the space with flimsy bravado and diluted pride. Because I knew what he didn't. I wasn't the same woman he left behind in that cafe. I wasn't waiting for his approval anymore. I was here on purpose, in a room that had once been unimaginable. And he was here by chance, hoping to be noticed. He asked if we could sit down, just to talk, but I told him I had a panel starting in a few minutes. It wasn't a lie, but even if it had been, I wouldn't have felt guilty. His eyes scanned me, looking for cracks, traces of the girl who once cried over his absence, but I wasn't giving him that. What I gave him was something far more unsettling, kindness without attachment. He fumbled again. "I've been meaning to reach out. I've thought about you a lot. I didn't expect to see you here like this." I tilted my head and let the silence speak louder than anything I could have said. Let him sit in it. Let him stew. He leaned in slightly, like we were still close, like the world hadn't turned since he left me behind. "You really have changed," he said, half smiling, but in a good way. I laughed softly, not bitter, just amused. "So have you," I replied, and I meant it. His change was visible too, but not in the way he hoped. His light had dimmed, his arrogance dulled. There was a heaviness to him now, a man still chasing the illusion of status while slowly realizing it no longer opened the doors it used to. I excused myself gently, touching his arm like a stranger would, and wished him luck. That stunned look on his face? I won't lie, it was satisfying. As I walked away, the band shifted to a slow, elegant number. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That moment had belonged to me, every part of it. I didn't win anything by seeing him again. I simply witnessed the gap between who I had become and who he had chosen to remain. And for the first time in our tangled story, I was the one walking away, on my terms, in my time, and with my head held higher than ever before. And something told me, he wasn't done with me yet. It happened 2 weeks later. I was at a private networking brunch hosted by a women's venture group, rooftop setting, clear skies, the clink of silver cutlery against fine porcelain. I'd just finished speaking on a panel about rebuilding from scratch when my assistant came over and whispered, "There's a man downstairs. Says he knows you. Leo something." My heart didn't skip. It didn't race. It simply steadied. Like my body was bracing for a wind I knew exactly how to stand against. I nodded once, smoothed the hem of my blazer, and told her to let him up. This time, I wanted him to see me here. He came up hesitantly, carrying that same stiffness from the gala. Dressed in business casual, trying to look composed, but everything about him was off. The way he held his shoulders, the tension behind his smile. "You're busy, I know," he started, almost apologetic now. "But I was hoping you might have a few minutes." I gestured to the lounge area near the terrace, a quiet spot with views of the skyline. Fitting, I thought, for what was coming. He sat across from me, eyes scanning the space, the people, the luxury. He was trying to understand how I'd made it here. And maybe more importantly, how he hadn't. He didn't waste time. "I'm going through something," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've been struggling, I guess. A few deals fell apart. People stopped returning my calls. I've got some ideas I'm trying to get off the ground, but, well, it's been hard getting the right eyes on them." I listened without interrupting, sipping my espresso. He kept going, laying it out in pieces. The job he lost, the startup that collapsed, the investor who ghosted him. And then finally, the ask. "I was wondering if you might know someone. Or maybe, I don't know, you could help me get a foot back in the door." There it was. The moment he'd likely rehearsed in his head, over and over. Except now that we were here, he seemed unsure of how to actually ask for help. From me. I studied him as he spoke, not out of malice, but curiosity. He looked like a man carrying failure in every pocket. His charm was thinner now, almost see-through, and beneath it, I could feel the panic. Not loud, not dramatic, just constant, like a slow leak in a sinking boat. He was no longer the man who broke my heart. He was just a man with a cracked mask and nowhere left to hide. I let the silence stretch for a moment. I wanted him to sit with it, the same way I once sat with his words in that cafe. And when I finally spoke, I kept my tone light, almost warm. "It's funny," I said, setting down my cup. "I remember when you told me I wasn't good enough, that I lacked ambition." His eyes dropped. "Ava, I didn't mean—" I held up a hand gently, cutting him off without raising my voice. "You did. And you were right about one thing. I wasn't matching your lifestyle. But what you didn't realize back then was that I was never meant to shrink myself to fit inside someone else's mold." He looked at me then. Really looked. And I saw it, the moment it hit him. Not just what he'd lost, but what he'd underestimated. It wasn't just about money or status. It was about power, about self-worth, about becoming. I leaned back in my chair, my expression soft but resolute. "I built this," I said quietly. "Brick by brick. While you were out chasing validation, I was learning to see myself without needing to be seen. And now you're here, asking for a favor from the same woman you once dismissed." I smiled. Not cruelly, just complete. And that, I think, hurt more than any rejection ever could. He didn't speak right away. His mouth opened slightly, like he wanted to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. Maybe he was realizing there was no version of this where he could undo what he said, no shortcut to redemption. "Eva, I was wrong," he finally murmured. "I didn't see what you were capable of. I didn't see you." I nodded, not out of agreement, but acknowledgement. I wasn't angry anymore. That part of me had burned out quietly, like the last ember of a fire that had long stopped mattering. But I also wasn't there to save him. That wasn't my role. Not now, not ever. I looked him in the eye, steady and unflinching. "I'm not bitter," I said. "But I also don't forget." I stood slowly, brushing invisible creases from my pants, my presence towering over him now, not in arrogance, but in truth. "I'm sorry," I continued, "but I don't help people who said I wasn't good enough." There was no malice in my voice, only finality, the kind that comes when you've already made peace with the past. I offered him a soft smile, not because he deserved it, but because I did. Then I turned, heels clicking against the rooftop tiles, each step a punctuation mark on the story he thought he controlled. Behind me, I didn't hear a word. Not an apology, not a protest. Just silence. The kind that lingers when someone realizes they misjudged not just a moment, but a person's entire worth. I walked back toward the event, back toward the women who were waiting to hear me speak again. And as the wind lifted my hair and the city glittered below us, I felt nothing but clarity. Revenge hadn't come in the form of cruelty. It came in the form of freedom. And in that moment, I knew. The best closure is becoming everything someone told you you'd never be. These days, I wake up with quiet mornings and full calendars. My phone buzzes with meetings, mentorship calls, podcast invites, but I still start every day the same. Barefoot, coffee in hand, watching the city stretch itself awake from my balcony. It's peaceful in a way I never used to crave, because back then I equated noise with progress. Now I know better. I know growth can be quiet, healing can be slow, and success doesn't have to be shouted to be felt. I've built something real, something lasting. Not just a business, but a life that feels honest and mine. I travel often now, speaking to rooms full of women who remind me of the person I used to be. Wide-eyed, bruised by someone else's words, wondering if they were too much or not enough. I don't stand in front of them as a hero. I stand as proof. Proof that pain doesn't define us, that being underestimated can be the best kind of fuel. I tell them about the heartbreak, the nights spent in a shoebox apartment with bills unpaid and self-worth hanging by a thread. I don't hide the ugly parts, because that's where the power lives, in the messy middle, not just the polished ending. And somewhere along the way, my story stopped being about Leo. It stopped being about proving him wrong. That part faded quietly, like fog lifting in the morning. My story became about proving myself right, about becoming the kind of woman younger me would be proud of. I've invested in startups led by women with fire in their eyes. I've mentored teenagers with cracked voices and brilliant ideas. I've sat across tables from powerhouses and whispered, "You belong here," because sometimes that's all it takes. A sentence that plants a seed. A hand that doesn't pull up, but reaches back. Every now and then, I get messages from people I haven't seen in years. Former classmates, old coworkers, even women who knew Leo. They reach out to say they saw me in an article, heard me on a panel, watched a clip of one of my talks on social media. And almost every time, they say the same thing. "You've changed so much." But what they don't always realize is, I didn't really change. I just returned to myself. The version of me that had always existed, buried under other people's expectations and my own fears. I didn't become someone new. I became someone honest. I've let go of the need to impress. I wear what I love. I say no without guilt. I walk into rooms with purpose, not permission. And that's not just confidence, it's peace. A peace I fought for through every late night and setback, every rejection and moment of self-doubt. And that peace is what makes me powerful now. Not the title, not the money, not the applause, just the simple truth that I know who I am, and I no longer need anyone else to confirm it. I still feel fear sometimes. Insecurity still visits me in small ways. But I meet it differently now, with grace, with boundaries, with self-respect. One day recently, I stood on stage at a women's summit and shared my story, start to finish. The audience was quiet as I told them about the cafe, the breakup, the words that once broke me. And then I told them what came after. Not the money, not the recognition, but the moment I looked in the mirror and finally believed I was enough. When I finished, a woman in the front row wiped her eyes and whispered, "Thank you. That was me last month." And just like that, I was reminded why I keep telling this story. Not for applause, but so no woman ever has to sit in silence, thinking she's alone in her breaking. Sometimes I still think about that girl sitting in the cafe, heart full of dreams, not knowing she was about to be shattered. I wish I could sit beside her now. I wouldn't warn her. I wouldn't try to stop the pain. I'd just hold her hand and tell her, "You will rise." Not because of what he said, but in spite of it. I'd tell her that one day she'd walk into rooms that used to terrify her, speak in spaces that once felt off limits, and lift other women who hadn't yet found their voices. I'd tell her that love would come again, but not from someone else, from herself. And that would be more than enough. People always want a happy ending, but I've learned life is more of a cycle than a finish line. And for me, coming full circle meant arriving back at my own worth. I didn't win because I proved him wrong. I won because I stopped needing to. Because I looked in the mirror one morning, no makeup, messy bun, coffee in hand, and thought, this is enough. That woman looking back at me, strong, tender, imperfect, growing, she is enough. I don't chase approval anymore. I walk beside purpose. I've traded revenge for restoration, and I've never felt more whole. Turns out I was always good enough. He just wasn't ready for someone like me.